1. Madam Speaker, ladies and gentlemen, if I told you that every year 40 million women get an abortion and roughly half of that, or 20 million of those abortions, are considered unsafe, and as a consequence, on the far end of the spectrum, on the lower limit, 40,000 women or over 100 women per day die and have their children lost, is a better rally point for social reform and self-determination as opposed to leaving it up to the vibes of the left or the right, the conservatives or the Republicans. Because socially beneficial narratives are a social construct that disproportionately and inaccurately place power and influence in the hands of elites, the majority, and people in power. Like what I suggested in my point of information, those who have the capacity to speak out and those people maybe who have better skills to be able to twist and spin narratives in a particularly perverse way. This creates an asymmetrical power dynamic that makes it significantly harder to be able to get societal and structural reform in order to be able to forward social, economic, and political change in all of these social issues we find important. The heart of our extension is telling you that all objective truths are socially beneficial, and in order to be able to unlock the ability of people to exercise agency and self-determination to make their conditions better, and as a consequence, rally for the beliefs of these communities under social movements is important. A few strategic observations of Top Half Clash. Firstly, this is a value judgment debate not about preferring one over the other, but about priority. Top half kinda deadlocky because we have to understand on both sides we have the desire to push socially beneficial narratives, but of course on both sides to be charitable to side government, unlike our opening, they also have and grapple with objective truths. This debate is about the harms and benefits of skewing to socially beneficial narratives. And on closing opposition, we're gonna take the higher burden as opposed to saying, we won't prioritize anything. We're gonna take the higher burden and say, we're gonna bite the comparative of, we're very much willing to be able to defend our comparative of being able to skew towards beneficial truths. Because these beneficial truths are actually at the core and heart of these social movements and the impact that side proposition wants, which is to forward social change. Secondly, opening government is quite unrealistic with how these socially beneficial narratives work. They don't exist in a monolith. They don't exist in a static kind of way. And that was the point of information I raised to their first speaker. Who exactly decides for the feminist movement or the queer community? They don't have a singular president or CEO or figurehead. There are huge amounts of dynamism and intersectionality within these particular movements. And the case of side proposition, both opening government and closing government, presuppose that we actually have a communal standard of what good is. Guys, what's good for the conservative right or the Republicans are less women's rights, less queer rights, and no abortions. What's good for the left-leaning progressive liberals are pro-abortion, more women's rights, more queer rights. That is to say, we perpetuate a communal sense of infighting and radicalization of he said, she said. We create in-groups and out-groups wherein these particular groups get even more radicalized to the point that those particular people who are moderate or centrist significantly get lost in the sauce and find it harder to actually arrive at a belief. That is to say, if we really want to be able to fight for things which are principled in nature, fighting for women's rights and the ability to exercise their right to bodily autonomy, or pushing for statewide legislation and reform, or putting a check against the patriarchy and other conservative states, you need our comparative of objective truths. Objective truths which include but are not limited to: number one, looking at the data of deaths by suicide from women who are not able to get an abortion and they feel hopeless in order to be able to improve their subsistence. Number two, deaths of under the table, back alley, sketchy as fuck abortions with a coat hanger, like the information I gave you in my peroration and introduction. Or number three, the failure rate and dissatisfaction of abandoned children who are trying to be adopted but are ultimately abandoned and left by social welfare and the state to become the urban poor and live on a day-to-day subsistence. The goal of this debate that I think a lot of teams missed is really in the heart of structural reform, socially, economically, and politically, which we think significantly become harder to lobby at the point in which you prioritize these socially beneficial narratives. Before I move on to my third point, I'll take the POI of who raised it. Yeah, go. The second person who raised it. Yeah, go.
Yeah, so you try to talk about how revealing information about abortions will lead to like more progress. People having capacity to spin narratives is symmetric. Someone opposes abortion, they know that it's unsafe for women. They just have like strong religious opposition to it because they believe that these women are immoral. You're not changing anyone's mind by pushing data down their throats.
No, that happens on your side. It's easier to phrase and frame history and religion when it's bound up in vague subjective shit like culture, as opposed to literally dealing with the fact that people die. Third point, opening opposition is correct, right? In the first minute of their speech about, yeah, the rule of the majority, but is severely unimpacted and under-mechanized. They also run this symmetric, unimportant clash about government control. Why is our comparative better? Objective truths are more nuanced because they're hinged on historical context and data. These things are harder to rebut in as much as the POI suggests that people can distort it. On both sides, these things can evolve. Objective truths, when data-driven, can also evolve. On government comparative, yes, you can change it, but it's diluted in things like political characteristics and caricatures. The ability of particular people to use these things in the powers of their own voice, their own money, and their own capacity. Yes, both can happen, but on side proposition, it's slower, it's riskier, and it's more dangerous for the very social movements and minorities they are motivated by. We are very proud to stand on side negative.